Human curiosity has always been one of the most powerful forces shaping our history. It drives exploration, innovation, and discovery. From charting the stars to decoding the mysteries of the human brain, curiosity has propelled humanity to achieve extraordinary feats. It has given us medicine, technology, and insights into the very nature of life itself. But curiosity can be a double-edged sword. When unrestrained by ethics, compassion, or oversight, it can lead to profound suffering. Across history, humans have been subjected to experiments that reveal the darkest corners of scientific ambition. People have been exposed to extreme pain, psychological trauma, and, in some cases, even death, all under the guise of research or the pursuit of knowledge. Some of these experiments are well documented and widely condemned. The Tuskegee syphilis study in the United States left hundreds of African American men untreated for decades, while Unit 731 in Japan conducted grotesque medical experiments on prisoners of war. Nazi doctors performed countless horrific procedures in concentration camps, and yet these are only the most infamous examples. Countless smaller, lesser-known experiments have left scars that history often overlooks. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the human condition. What are the limits of curiosity? How far will humans go in the name of discovery? When does obedience, ideology, or ambition cross the line into cruelty? And most hauntingly, could similar abuses happen today, hidden behind the veil of progress? In this video, we will explore 4 of the scariest human experiments in history. 2 are chillingly real, 1 is a legendary story whose truth is still debated, and 1 is a lesser-known but equally horrifying case. Each story shows the dangerous intersection of curiosity, authority, and ideology, reminding us that science, while a tool for progress, can also be a weapon for harm. By the end of this journey, you'll confront a chilling realization. Curiosity itself is not inherently good or evil. It is shaped by the intentions and morality of those who wield it. And when conscience is ignored, curiosity can become the scariest experiment of all. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram at Yale University conducted an experiment that would forever change our understanding of human behavior. His central question seemed simple but horrifying. How far will ordinary people go when ordered to harm another human being? The experiment was designed against the backdrop of post-World War II society. The atrocities of the Holocaust were still fresh in memory, and Nazi officers had defended their actions by saying, "I was only following orders." Milgram wanted to investigate whether obedience to authority was a uniquely German phenomenon or a universal human trait. Could regular, everyday people commit acts they would normally consider immoral simply because someone in power instructed them to do so? The experimental setup was deceptively ordinary. Volunteers were told they were participating in a study about learning and memory. Each was assigned the role of teacher, while the learner was strapped into a chair with electrodes. In reality, the learner was an actor, and no real shocks were administered. Yet the teachers were led to believe that the shocks were real. A shock generator sat in front of the teacher, with 30 switches ranging from 15 to 450 volts, labeled from slight shock to XXX. Each time the learner answered a question incorrectly, the teacher was instructed to administer a shock, increasing the voltage with each mistake. As the experiment progressed, the learner began to cry out, plead for mercy, and eventually scream in agony. Some begged, "Please, I can't stand this anymore," or "Let me out, it's too painful." The teachers, however, faced constant pressure from the experimenter, who calmly instructed, "Please continue." The experiment requires you to go on. You have no choice. You must continue. Participants displayed extreme stress, trembling, sweating, stammering, and even nervous laughter. Some hesitated, their hands hovering over the switches, visibly torn between their conscience and obedience. One teacher reportedly said, "I don't want to hurt him, but the man in the lab coat says I must continue." Another shook so violently that he could barely press the switches, yet the insistence of authority compelled him forward. The results were shocking. 65% of participants administered the maximum 450 volts, fully believing they were causing serious harm, or even death, to the learner. The emotional toll was immense. Many participants reported guilt, shame, and lingering self-doubt. One man said, "I felt like I was capable of anything terrible." Another confessed he would never trust authority in the same way again. Psychological insights from the Milgram experiment remain relevant today. It revealed that under conditions of authority, ordinary people can act in ways that contradict their morals and ethics. Obedience can overpower personal conscience, and societal or institutional pressures can manipulate behavior to terrifying effect. Milgram's work sparked global debate, raising profound ethical questions. Should experiments manipulate participants to this degree? What safeguards are necessary to protect individuals? And perhaps most unsettling, how much cruelty exists within us, dormant until activated by authority or social pressure? If ordinary people can harm strangers under instruction, what happens in environments with stronger social, political, or ideological pressures? How much of human cruelty is latent, waiting for the right conditions to emerge? Milgram's study reminds us that morality is fragile, and conscience is often tested in ways we might never anticipate. The true horror is not just what people did in this experiment. It's the realization that these same pressures exist everywhere in society. How many acts of obedience today go unquestioned, unnoticed, or unchallenged? While Stanley Milgram explored obedience in adults, another experiment targeted the most vulnerable members of society: children. In 1939, psychologist Wendell Johnson and his graduate student Mary Tudor conducted what later became known as the Monster Study. Their stated goal was to understand the causes of stuttering, but what unfolded would expose the terrifying power of words, authority, and psychological manipulation. The study recruited 22 orphaned children from the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans home, many of whom had already endured trauma from loss and neglect. Living in an institutional environment without parental support, these children were highly susceptible to authority figures. The researchers divided them into two groups. These children were praised for their speech, encouraged to participate in exercises, and reassured that mistakes were normal. These children were criticized for mistakes even when they spoke perfectly. They were told repeatedly that their speech was defective, that they were stuttering, and that they would never improve. Session by session, the children's experiences worsened. In the negative group, a boy who had previously read fluently began to stammer uncontrollably. Another child, who had spoken confidently, gradually stopped attempting to read aloud, curling into himself in fear. Researchers documented these changes meticulously, noting trembling, tearfulness, and visible anxiety. Yet they provided no comfort or explanation, treating the children as subjects rather than human beings. One particularly striking case involved a child who initially responded well to encouragement but was moved into the negative group midway through the study. Within days, his self-esteem collapsed. He avoided eye contact, refused to speak in class, and exhibited signs of depression. Observers noted that even small corrections, delivered in a stern voice, caused him to freeze or cry. The monster study unfolded in a time when psychology was still developing as a scientific discipline, and ethical oversight was minimal. Johnson and Tudor were interested in theoretical questions about speech development, but they failed to account for the profound human cost. Unlike Milgram's adult participants, these children had no capacity to consent or understand the purpose of the experiment. The long-term consequences were severe. Many children in the negative group experienced lasting speech difficulties, anxiety, and social withdrawal. Some carried these scars into adulthood, struggling with self-confidence and social interaction. Survivors only came forward decades later, leading to lawsuits and formal apologies. But the psychological damage could never be undone. The monster study demonstrates the extraordinary influence of authority and verbal reinforcement on developing minds. Positive words can nurture growth and confidence, while repeated criticism can cause deep, lasting harm. The study also underscores the vulnerability of populations lacking agency, in this case, orphaned children, to the misuse of power and trust. If mere words could leave permanent psychological scars on children, imagine the potential consequences of ideology, coercion, or systemic abuse on larger groups. How many modern practices, whether in education, psychology, or other fields, may unintentionally replicate aspects of the monster study? Just as Milgram revealed the dark side of obedience in adults, the monster study exposes how authority can exploit vulnerability in children. And yet, even more extreme experiments in history push the boundaries of ethics and human endurance, waiting to be explored. Our next story straddles the line between history and legend: the Philadelphia Experiment. In 1943, during the height of World War II, the U.S. Navy allegedly attempted a highly classified experiment on the destroyer USS Eldridge. The goal, according to reports, was to render the ship invisible to radar and possibly even to the naked eye, a revolutionary technology that, if true, could have changed naval warfare forever. Eyewitness accounts describe bizarre and horrifying outcomes. Crew members reportedly experienced severe disorientation, nausea, and panic attacks. Some were said to have become physically fused to the metal of the ship, while others disappeared completely, only to reappear hours later, injured and mentally traumatized. These claims suggest that the experiment may have gone beyond invisibility, venturing into teleportation or even temporary time displacement, concepts that today still feel like science fiction. The alleged timeline adds to the mystery. On October 28, 1943, the Eldridge was docked in Philadelphia. Witnesses reported a green fog surrounding the ship as it suddenly vanished from view. Moments later, it reappeared. But some sailors were missing, and others were found disoriented, burned, or exhibiting severe psychological disturbances. Accounts claim that crew diaries described extreme vertigo, skin sensations like burning, and a sense of being pulled apart while standing near the ship. Some survivors allegedly struggled with severe trauma for the rest of their lives, describing experiences that seemed impossible to reconcile with reality. The Navy officially denies that any such experiment occurred. Historians argue that the stories likely stemmed from a misunderstanding of degaussing technology, which was used to make ships less visible to magnetic mines. Over time, the tales were exaggerated, sensationalized, and spread through conspiracy literature, creating a mythos that blurred fact and fiction. Yet, the Philadelphia Experiment persists in popular culture, inspiring books, films, documentaries, and discussions about government secrecy, advanced technologies, and unexplained phenomena. Some accounts claim that the Eldridge traveled through time or another dimension. Others suggest the experiment was an early attempt at teleportation. While these claims are widely considered unverified or fictional, they reflect deep-seated fears about the consequences of human ambition unchecked by ethics or understanding. Whether fact or legend, the Philadelphia experiment taps into the human fascination with the unknown. It serves as a metaphor for the dangers of experimenting with forces beyond our comprehension. Movies, novels, and UFO conspiracy theories continue to use the story as a cautionary tale. Advanced knowledge without oversight can be catastrophic. Even as a legend, the story resonates because it touches on universal fears: invisibility, loss of control, secrecy, and the unknown. It illustrates how curiosity, when pursued without caution or ethical consideration, can ignite both imagination and dread. The Philadelphia experiment forces us to consider the consequences of technological ambition untempered by conscience. Could secret experiments like this exist today, hidden in top-secret labs or military facilities? How many potentially dangerous projects are underway, shielded from public scrutiny? And even if the story is myth, why does it feel so plausible and terrifying to us? Unlike Milgram or the Monster Study, where the human cost was clear and documented, the Philadelphia experiment blurs the line between reality and myth, but it reinforces the same lesson. The pursuit of knowledge without ethics or restraint can have unpredictable and horrifying consequences. Our final story takes us to South Africa during the height of apartheid, a period marked by systemic racial segregation, political oppression, and rigid social control. Amid this environment of fear and discrimination, the Aversion Project was conducted, a series of horrifying experiments targeting homosexual military personnel in the South African Defense Force. The stated goal was to cure homosexuality through extreme and unethical treatments. Many of the participants were young conscripts, often without choice, who found themselves accused of homosexuality by commanding officers or fellow soldiers. Those identified were subjected to brutal procedures that combined pseudoscientific rationale with ideology-driven cruelty. These included chemical castration, electroconvulsive therapy, hormone injections, and surgical interventions, all designed to suppress or correct their sexual orientation. Daily procedures were traumatizing. Some men were forced to endure electric shocks while being exposed to sexually explicit images intended to trigger arousal, conditioning their responses through pain. Hormone injections caused severe physical side effects, such as breast tissue, growth, weight fluctuations, and infertility. Surgical procedures permanently altered bodies, leaving survivors with lifelong physical and psychological scars. One veteran later recounted the sheer terror of standing in a line while officers selected men for treatment, knowing that refusal would bring punishment or ostracism. Psychological consequences were devastating. Participants reported extreme anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress that persisted for decades. Many attempted suicide or suffered long-term social isolation, fearing exposure in a society that was deeply hostile to homosexuality. The combination of pain, humiliation, and social stigma created a mental and emotional burden that no apology could fully alleviate. Survivors' testimonies reveal how the project shattered their trust in authority, medicine, and society itself. The Aversion Project reflects the intersection of ideology, military authority, and pseudoscience. The apartheid regime's rigid social and political structures enabled these experiments to occur without oversight. Scientific research was twisted to serve a discriminatory political agenda, demonstrating how institutional power can sanction cruelty under the guise of morality or national security. Unlike Milgram or the Monster Study, the Aversion Project involved intentional physical harm and irreversible procedures. It underscores the absolute necessity of informed consent, human rights protections, and independent ethical review in research and medical practice. The project remains a stark historical warning. Ideology combined with authority can transform science into a tool of oppression. This case highlights the vulnerability of marginalized groups to abuse. It also demonstrates how societal prejudice can magnify the destructive effects of experimentation. Individuals subjected to the Aversion Project were not passive participants. They were targeted because of difference, punished for identities society refused to accept. The long-term trauma underscores the human cost when authority overrides empathy and conscience. How many modern experiments, policies, or treatments might still exploit vulnerable populations under the guise of research, health, or social conformity? What safeguards are needed to ensure science serves humanity rather than ideology? And how do we confront the lingering impact of such abuses in contemporary society? The Aversion Project, like the other experiments we've explored, shows the terrifying potential when curiosity, authority, and ideology intersect. Across decades and continents, humans have tested the limits of ethics, leaving scars that echo far beyond the laboratory. The final lesson is clear. The pursuit of knowledge, or control without conscience, can be far more horrifying than any fictional tale. Across history, humans have repeatedly tested the boundaries of morality, authority, and curiosity. From Milgram's shocking obedience study to the cruel manipulation of orphans in the monster study, and from the alleged mysteries of the Philadelphia experiment to the horrifying Aversion Project, one lesson becomes clear. Curiosity without conscience can be terrifying. In the Milgram experiment, we saw ordinary adults commit acts that conflicted deeply with their own sense of right and wrong when pressured by authority. In the monster study, vulnerable children endured lasting psychological harm from repeated criticism and manipulation. The Philadelphia experiment reminds us of our fascination with the unknown and the potential consequences of unchecked technological ambition, whether fact, fiction, or something in between. Finally, the Aversion Project illustrates the devastating human cost when ideology and authority combine to justify cruelty. Each of these cases, whether real or legendary, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. People can obey harmful orders, exploit the vulnerable, and justify extreme actions under pressure, ideology, or authority. Curiosity itself is not inherently dangerous. It is the moral compass of those who wield it that determines whether it becomes a force for knowledge or a weapon of suffering. These stories also serve as a warning. Ethical safeguards, informed consent, and oversight are not abstract principles. They are essential to protecting human life and dignity. Without them, the drive to understand, improve, or control can easily become a vehicle for abuse. How would you act if faced with authority commanding actions you instinctively knew were wrong? How do we balance the thirst for knowledge with ethical responsibility? And in today's world, filled with advanced technology and hidden research, how can we ensure that curiosity serves humanity rather than causing harm? The dark side of human curiosity is not just in laboratories, ships, or military experiments. It is embedded in systems, ideologies, and institutions that prioritize ambition, control, or ideology over empathy and ethics. Recognizing this pattern is the first step in preventing it from repeating. As we look back on these experiments, a chilling truth emerges. Human beings are capable of unimaginable cruelty, not because they are monsters, but because ordinary people can sometimes follow orders, bend to authority, or ignore conscience when circumstances allow it. And yet, there is hope. By studying these cases, questioning authority, and prioritizing ethical responsibility, we can ensure that curiosity one of humanity's greatest gifts, becomes a tool for discovery and understanding rather than suffering.